hysteria, sedatives, tranquilizers, radiation, bloodletting, of course, and even execution. I'm Robyn, by the way. I'm a nurse and I am in perimenopause. Now, going back to childhood, I remember people talking about the change or the change of life. I think that's actually what my grandma called it. And I even remember on Golden Girls when they would talk about it too. Do you remember that episode where Blanche thought that she was pregnant and it actually just turned out that she was in menopause? This woman was like 55 or something like that when she was going through that. Here I am, just about to turn 45, knees deep in perimenopause, and I am way ahead of her. Look at me! Oh, menopause. Apparently, Maud touched on it too, which makes me happy because I really like B. Arthur, and even when I was a kid, I was looking forward to old age. But I definitely was not looking forward to menopause. Even Samantha from Sex and the City touched on it ever so slightly. But what's worse is it was almost never mentioned in TV. I really am just bringing up those few things because those were the only things where I saw it. I remember there was one maybe Diane Keaton movie back in the early 2000s where they talked about it. But we were left to believe that this was going to be some final, terrifying chapter in our lives. And I'm going to be honest with you, I was kind of scared about that. I thought I was going to be left shriveled up and decrepit, drying up over the hill, old maid's disease. Like, what are these terms? Where did they come from? From a group of people who are actually a massive amount of people in the world. And the thing is, we were left to believe that these women were like older, like mid to late 50s, in their 60s or beyond, maybe even in their 70s. And I'm going to get into that crazy hormone replacement study that was done on older women that basically left us younger women in the perimenopause phase to really suffer. So when I started getting symptoms in my 30s, I really had no idea that it could be menopause or perimenopause. When's my mandatory hysterectomy? Don't worry, this won't be depressing. But first, I really should quickly get into the difference between menopause and perimenopause. Now, we are hearing so much about perimenopause these days, and that is because that's the stage so many of us are in for like 10 years. Menopause truly is just one day, and that day is when it has been exactly 12 months from your last menstrual period, where it is like very, 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 very likely that you are done. You are then in postmenopause. But for those of us who are in those 10 years leading up to that phase, that is perimenopause, and that is when all of the trouble starts. Now back to the hysterectomies. I am not making fun of people with hysterectomies. They are certainly a very valuable thing for a lot of women these days, but I think back in the day, they used to give them to just about everyone. It seemed like probably not, but so many people had hysterectomies, probably because they had heavy bleeding. And that is a thing that can happen in perimenopause. And yes, if it is like bleeding a lot and we are like losing so much iron and blood and all that stuff, yeah, it makes sense that they would do that. But back in the day, they just didn't know what to do. And the only symptoms we really heard of were hot flashes, night sweats, sleeping badly, and being grumpy. Oh, Mom must be going through the change. Instead, there are actually many, many other symptoms and signs that women can deal with. Cognitive changes can be a huge one. Remember when people would talk about like pregnancy brain and baby brain? Well, that seems to go double for perimenopause. And there's also weight gain. I myself have experienced that. And I work hard just to maintain a weight that's probably about 10 pounds more than it was just a few years ago. There's joint pain. There are hair changes, skin changes, which was my first symptom, headaches, urinary changes, which was my second symptom, and heart palpitations is another one that women can get. This one actually really grinds my gears because back when I was working in the urgent care department, we would get women that would come in who were having heart palpitations. And I remember one of my coworkers being like, oh, she should just know that it's from menopause. And I just thought like, oh my gosh, like I had never heard of that. And Why, if you had heart palpitations, should you just assume that that's it? Don't just assume that. Like, go to the emergency department. We don't just like assume that like cardiac symptoms are from perimenopause. What a crazy thing to say. I just couldn't believe that. Historically, just a lot of these symptoms were just too darn much for society to deal with. So instead of just sort of like doing research at the time, because hardly any research has ever been done on women over the years, because we are just too complicated with our cycles and our somewhat unpredictable cycles, that they pretty much just focused on men for just about everything. So back in the 1800s, early 1900s, they treated it like as a pathology, like it was a disease. There was like electrothoc, and this like goes up. There was electroshock therapy, and it was treated like we were mentally unstable and sick. So some of the things they would do was electroshock therapy, the sedatives, as I mentioned, asylums. It was treated as like hysteria. They would do tranquilizers. Who knows? They probably did lobotomies. I'm not saying they did. I'm just saying maybe they did. There were just so many things. And then, of course, there's a whole HRT debacle. Do you remember hearing about the HRT debacle? So back in 1991, there was something called the Women's Health Initiative, and they wanted to help postmenopausal women. So they started doing some replacement of some hormones. I think it was primarily estrogen. And the problem was that there started to be some things that came up. Was some cancers that came up. I do believe that there were some symptoms that went down for women. There were things like heart disease that improved. Maybe dementia improved, because now we're seeing that dementia and heart disease improve a lot with HRT. But with the rise of breast cancer and some other women's cancers, they were understandably a little bit gun shy. So they completely pulled back on doing these studies and took the HRT away from the women. Now, I remember watching Oprah back in the day, watching Dr. Phil, watching these women just talk about how they were suffering, how they were just so angry, how they were so anxious, and that the HRT would help so much. And I remember Dr. Phil's wife, Robyn, saying that she was doing the bioidentical hormone replacement. I think this was like in the early 2000s, and she was seeing great results, but people were like, whoa, 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 you don't want to do that. That's really dangerous, which I get. But the problem is, instead of approaching it a little bit differently, they just pulled the rug out from everything for quite a while and just stopped this initiative, which, if you think about it, not only did a lot of women suffer, but there probably were tons of dementias that maybe could have been prevented or postponed. There were probably a ton of heart diseases that as well could have been prevented or postponed. I'm sure many people died. I don't know the answer to all of these things, but I do know that I'm glad that finally some light has been shed on this subject, because historically it has not been. We certainly never saw anything like this on Leave It to Beaver. We didn't see anything like this in shows like the Mary Tyler Moore Show. They never touched on any of this stuff. But I'm so glad to be at least alive and going through this right now. Like, I've talked about my mom's generation and her going through it, and that was before they could do anything. I remember my mom taking sage to help with her hot flashes. And I remember a nursing instructor when I was in nursing school that was talking about like her struggle with hot flashes. And that's just the beginning, right? Like, what if we can help prevent heart disease? What if we can help prevent cognitive decline? Like, for me and my family, Alzheimer's is a huge deal. My grandpa has dementia. I love my grandpa. And his siblings all had it. All 5 of them had Alzheimer's. And for me, my goal right now at this stage is to prevent Alzheimer's. I don't want to get Alzheimer's. I don't want to have heart disease. My grandpa, he had quadruple bypass as well. Now, the current thoughts of HRT is that it actually can be very helpful in managing a ton of the symptoms, but it has to be coupled, if you're going to have estrogen, it has to be coupled with progesterone, which is the bioidentical one. And I remember watching Oprah and Dr. Phil when they were like, because Oprah, God love her, she would tackle this stuff. She would talk about that. And I remember on Dr. Phil, his wife was saying she was struggling. And this other lady came on and she was basically like, I'm ready to like rip my hair out. Like, I don't care what anybody says. So she would, so they tried this like bioidentical hormones and they were both feeling so much better. So the thing is, once they realize that, oh, you know what? We probably can just start treating these women. But what we need to do is to give them the bioidentical progesterone with the estrogen, and that can help with preventing heart disease, preventing or slowing down the risk of dementia. It can also help with things like preventing high blood pressure, or at least like reducing that. Like, there's just so many things that it can help, especially with like the uncomfortable sensations. Apparently, it helps like a ton with night sweats, which thankfully I don't deal with right now. But I'm so glad that at this stage of life, that the lie that this is just an absolute nightmare is not true anymore. And it probably was back in the day, because these poor women had to deal with this basically alone. I don't know if they talked about it to many people. Maybe if you had a sister, you could, but a lot of people, they don't have sisters. And a lot of people probably were just left to think that they were crazy. But I'm glad now, because I can go out for dinner with my friends and we can talk about it. I can come on YouTube and I can talk about it to you guys. And you guys can write in the comments about what it was like for you or what symptoms you're experiencing right now. Like for me, I was in my late 30s. I can tell you, like for me, it was like the skin. Started getting pimples on my chin. Started having like some urinary symptoms, but I can manage things. We can talk about it. I love that. Think about how lucky Taylor Swift is going to be in 10 years when she's 45. And the society is actually recognizing that that us perimenopausal, postmenopausal women are still valuable for society, that we should have studies done on us, because they didn't want to do studies on us before, because we were just too hard to study with our varying hormones, which then just made it so that we only know how to treat men for all this stuff. And I am not complaining about men. Look at the size of this weed. This thing is huge. Ugh. But what we can do instead is we can be in this time where there is so much hope. One of the things that really hit me, though, was energy. My energy was so low. I have to be so careful with not eating a ton of sugar. But I've made some really great changes that have helped my energy so much. Check that video right here. Thank you so much for watching. I hope something great happens for you, and I will see you next time.